During the atrocities of war, there are often efforts to dehumanize the opposition. This action helps justify the acts of violence against other humans, but it also contributes to a lack of perceived rights and protections of members of vulnerable groups, such as prisoners of war, civilians in occupied regions, or targeted minorities. Many people are familiar with the inhumane and unethical human research conducted on prisoners in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. Following the end of World War II, 20 physicians and 3 SS officials were charged with the war crimes and crimes against humanity in what was known as the doctors' trials. 7 of these were sentenced to death, while 9 others received prison sentences. As an additional outcome of the doctors' trials was the establishment of guidelines for the ethical treatment of human research subjects. The Nuremberg Code is a set of 10 ethical research principles for human and humane experimentation, including a requirement for explicit voluntary consent, the potential for meaningful results that benefit society, that it needs to be based on animal experimentation, as well as avoiding unnecessary physical and mental pain and suffering. Ultimately, the Nuremberg Code was never adopted as a law or even an official ethical guideline of any organization. However, it remains an important step in establishing ethical guidelines for human research throughout the world. In a separate video linked in the description below, we considered the implications of a neurosurgeon that needed to rely on Edward Pernkopf's anatomical atlas based on the dissections and drawings of victims of Nazi atrocities. These victims included political prisoners, executed individuals, and potentially concentration camp prisoners. In this video, we will consider the potential use of data collected by scientists in the Japanese Army before and during World War II. In occupied China during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II, the Imperial Japanese Army conducted lethal human experimentation for biological and chemical warfare research and development. It's estimated that their actions contributed to the deaths of roughly 14,000 people directly in experiments and another 200,000 to 300,000 people infected by biological agents. The dehumanization associated with these types of activities was evidenced by the researchers referring to the prisoners as Maruta, translated as log, and they were identified by numbers rather than by name. The actions of Unit 731 were covert, but it was headquartered in the innocuously named Epidemic Prevention Research Laboratory. Within the program, Unit 731 researchers injected Chinese prisoners of war and civilians with infectious agents such as bacteria that cause the plague, syphilis, or gonorrhea. To develop biological weapons, pathogens such as anthrax, cholera, typhoid, and plague-infected fleas were unleashed on the community by aerial spraying, biodegradable bombs, or contaminated food or water supplies causing localized epidemics. The infected individuals were monitored to track the disease progression. There were no records of survivors of these programs, and it appears that those individuals who did not die from the disease were killed for autopsy analysis. Some of the reports indicate that the results of some of these studies were published in peer-reviewed journals, written as if, instead of human subjects, the work was completed on non-human primates called Manchurian monkeys. After the war, the Soviet Union and the United States collected the data from the unit. 12 researchers were tried in the Khabarovsky war crimes trial, but were given light sentences in exchange for their cooperation in the development of the Soviet Union's own bioweapons program. The United States military granted immunity to some researchers despite efforts and reports that the U.S. biological warfare program had already surpassed Unit 731 earlier in the war. However, the arrangements indicated that the scientists recognized after the war that the data could be important in the understanding of the spread of infectious diseases. There are valid claims that the Unit 731 research generated the most comprehensive medical data set on human-pathogen interactions. Some scientists argue that the data could provide important insights into the spread of infectious diseases such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Epidemiologists are scientists that study past disease outbreaks and pandemics to learn how to better predict the spread of emerging diseases. However, since the disease-causing pathogens undergo mutations that affect how infectious the disease is in spreading and how virulent the disease is in causing the illness, each disease is somewhat unique and has variations from previous outbreaks. So it is important to study a broad range of past diseases to better understand future outbreaks. Despite the atrocities involved in Unit 731's experimentation on civilians and prisoners, the data they collected has the potential to provide important information about the control and management of infectious diseases such as COVID-19. It would be unethical and impossible to replicate the types of experiments they completed, but the data may be the most complete information on the interactions that occur between the pathogen and the humans in the deadly plagues that were studied. In the legal profession is a doctrine that talks about the fruit of the poisonous tree. This is a legal principle that evidence that results from inappropriate or unethical actions by law enforcement is inadmissible in court. In this legal analogy, the poisonous tree corresponds to actions such as an illegal search resulting in the evidence, the fruit, that would not have been found under normal or proper procedures. Is the data from Unit 731 analogous to the fruit of the poisonous tree? There's no debate that the atrocities committed by the scientists were horrific and unethical, but the data exists and cannot be obtained using appropriate methods today. This gives rise to three different moral and ethical considerations about what to do with the Unit 731 data. First, could consider the use of the data would wrong the victims anew and so therefore should not be used under any circumstances. The second principle is the data may not be relevant and therefore would not provide valuable information and therefore should not be used. And then finally, the data could be used under specific circumstances because there is no alternative way to collect similar data ethically. Now, what we need to decide is which of these three various scenarios applies to the Unit 731 data. Based on this background, we can now consider this week's ethical dilemmas in science. When, if ever, would it be appropriate to use data generated by unethical research? Does the potential value of the scientific data make a difference in whether or not the data should be used? And finally, is it possible to honor the victims in some way to offset the wrongs that were committed against them so that the data can be used for the good of society? And finally, how do we ensure that any use of the Unit 731 data is used for the prevention of a disease outbreak rather than the development of new pathogens or biological weapons? Thank you for viewing this video. As always, in the description below is additional information, including readings. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, please look at the comments below.